Welcome to New Realities. I'm Alan Steinfeld, and this program is about the evolution of our consciousness. And there's nothing more current and more important than who we are as human beings, who we are as a civilization, an Earth-based civilization, and where we're moving into a bigger view of who we are. That's why I have tonight's guest, Richard Dolan. He's a UFO researcher. He's the author of UFOs in the National Security State, AD, After Disclosure, and his new book, UFOs for the 21st Century Mind. It just seems that UFOs is a subject that is not going away. They appear in the news, they disappear for maybe a couple of years, and then they come back. But it seems like, are we making progress? Those people studying ufology, it just seems like we're grabbing after loose straws. And is that true? I mean, you're deeper into it than me. Are we making progress with a mainstream public that is in denial, or are we just in the same place we've always been since like the 1947?
I think you've framed this perfectly.
Okay.
We're dealing with, in my opinion, really the greatest mystery of our time. This is how I see it. And you're right, UFOs will not go away. Mm-hmm. And when you think back from the 1940s until today, periodically there have been these moments where it seemed like the government, the military, the Air Force, whomever, have just put UFOs away, the scientific community, and they think, we've solved it, it's done.
Right.
And it's not done. It's not solved. There are more baffling UFO sightings today than there have ever been. This has not gone away. Mm-hmm. And to explain it in any one way as secret military craft or anything, it doesn't work. It's too difficult.
But you know, maybe there's more, but it's the mainstream media, it's the it's the people in charge that really have to come out and make a shift. There might be more, but is media covering it? Are people coming out of the closet with it and saying yes?
Right. Well, what we're seeing is since the age of the web, really in the last, let's say, 20 years, with true internet, true global communication by the people, not just those guys at the top of our food chain. Back in the 1970s and 80s, before all of this happened, it was a lot easier for the major news organizations and television and the mainstream media to dismiss this. And what we found is that since the 1990s and in the last, in this century, the 21st century, people are incredibly interested in UFOs. UFOs are one of the first important topics to even make it onto the internet back in the late 1980s. And that has pushed mainstream media to more and more to accommodate itself to this widely acknowledged public interest. So I think that's part of it. And the other thing is we're moving on a very, very fast track as a society, as a civilization, indeed as a species, to, I feel, getting to a point in the near future where this topic is going to be blown wide open.
It's going to be blown open by some form of disclosure, some government leak, some national sighting, something that cannot be denied.
I think so, because we're at a point now where there are certain capabilities that we have now that we did not have even a decade ago. Think of something like WikiLeaks or the movement Anonymous, for example, where thousands upon thousands of very sensitive government documents have now been leaked illegally. Doesn't matter though, legally or not, it doesn't matter. They're out into the public domain, whereas 10 years ago, WikiLeaks didn't exist 10 years ago because it couldn't exist 10 years ago. We didn't have a global infrastructure to accommodate it. But now we have that infrastructure, and here's WikiLeaks, here's Anonymous. So leaks are coming out. Do you really doubt that there are significant leaks relating to the UFO topic? They are waiting to come out. And I think it will happen. It's a matter of time. Another technology is simply cell phone technology. We have capability in terms of video recording, and who knows what the next generation of cell phones, infrared, night vision, where I think we're getting to the point where something important is going to be captured by multiple people. That will be a very difficult thing to explain away. So disclosure, I think, will happen, but it will be a forced event. This is not something that the powers that be are just going to say, oh, well, we'll just tell you now.
But you talk in your book, The 21st Century Mind. This is sort of a topic I've been thinking about and what the program is about. Consciousness is like a density of thought. So there's people we know that say, yes, of course, and then you meet people who say it's impossible, no, why aren't they here, why aren't they showing up? If you feel who they are, there's a limitation, there's a restriction in their thinking that won't acknowledge something outside their parameters of awareness. You know what I mean? The sense of who these people are, this narrowness that you feel around them. It's like a Republican, you know, they have a different, they have a restriction, and it's the mind that has to be talked to. The evidence is all there. You've uncovered it in your, I mean, it's right on the internet if you go just a little deeper below the surface. So the mind, how do we shift the mind of those people?
Well, I don't know. I asked myself this question. I think that the only thing that's really going to cause a global shift in consciousness, if we want to put it that way, is going to be the shock, the dramatic, traumatic shock that their reality that they have become attached to for their whole lives is grossly inadequate. No one wants to go through that process, honestly, and people will meet it only with great resistance. But you know, parents are never ready for their first child, but it happens. Where no one or very few of us will be ready for something like disclosure, but that won't stop it from happening. It's going to happen, like it or not. We're on a train, an express train to a certain destination, and that destination is going to be a society with very, very advanced technology, very advanced capability of communicating, very advanced capabilities of sifting sensitive information out of the vault in terms of leaks. It's a matter of time, Alan. It's going to happen. So the consciousness changes will happen, but I think it will happen as a result of this traumatic new information that will come out.
Right. I mean, there have been traumatic shifts in world culture. I mean, I would think the bombing of Pearl Harbor, the Kennedy assassination. At the Kennedy assassination, something changed in a moment. We were no longer in one age. We were blasted into a new age.
So,
it could be that traumatic a moment for the planet.
Yeah. When I co-authored AD After Disclosure a couple of years ago, and I think this was our conclusion, that the UFO disclosure moment will be like the JFK moment. It'll be like 9/11. It'll be one of these defining elements of what will then become the world after that.
It's, you know, for me, it's very exciting times. I mean, in a sense, I've been preparing for this my whole life because I always knew it wasn't a question. And what's the big deal? How could you ever think that we're the only things out there? There's a Greek philosopher from 4th century BC says to think that there's only life on this planet is to think that you're walking by a field of freshly planted wheat and only one plant will grow.
I would love to read this philosopher.
Yeah, Melos, M-E-L-O-S. He said that. I'll say that again so for the edit. This Greek philosopher said, thinking there's only life on this planet is like walking past a field of freshly planted grain and only thinking one plant will grow. That's the obvious.
Yeah, it's a beautiful insight.
Well, it's the obvious illusion that we're not a freak of nature. We're part of a larger cosmic awareness, and that's the 21st century mind to me.
That's a very big part. This is a new book that I'm just finishing writing it now. It'll be out, I think, in about a month or so. It's called UFOs for the 21st Century Mind. And really what this book is, I think of it as a fresh introduction to the entire amazing field of the study of UFOs, which is a lot more than just studying reports of metallic-looking objects in the sky.
Right.
When we talk about UFOs, it involves so much, and I've tried to encompass all of that in this new book, which
well, where do you start? Like, so what do you cover? Like, you cover sightings, of course, and abduction. I mean, tell me,
well, yeah,
give me the overlay.
This is a book like if you have a skeptical cousin who says, "Come on, what's going on with this?" I would think I'd show them this book, or even for someone who's been studying this a long time, it's got fresh insights. So I really try to cover everything. There's history, because that is really the thing that I love the most.
Where do you start with the history? I'm just curious.
From ancient astronauts / ancient aliens right up to the present day. So it covers a very good historical overview of the really important and interesting sightings, some that you, I'm sure, know about, others you probably don't know about. There's several chapters dealing with the politics. I don't think you can understand UFOs without understanding the nature of what I would call the cover-up and the deep politics behind it. That is, trying to get a sophisticated understanding of how this whole thing.
No, that is so important. The politics, because it's the politics that rules the intellectual awareness, in a sense. You know, the fact that Washington has not come forward and say, yes, we have craft.
Right.
And that the media then can ridicule people who do come forward, and
you have to understand the politics. Years ago, when I first broke into this field, I started researching it about 20 years ago. I thought, you know, if you just write a good enough book with laying out the evidence, you'll break open that secrecy. Of course, it didn't happen. And it really prompted me to start understanding, well, why did this not break out in the 1940s and 50s when the evidence was there? Why not in the 60s and 70s? And you have to look at the political connections. You have to understand, how is it that the media has just been laying down? How is it that the political system and the academic community?
And the presidents and those in charge.
All of that, and the intelligence community. So you have to understand how all of that works. And that was revolutionary for me. Well, seeing what is the actual structure of power in this world? I'm still trying to figure it out.
Well, the other comment about that is at the Washington hearings in last April for UFO disclosure, when you spoke, you among 6 or maybe 40 other people spoke in front of 6 former congressional leaders.
Yes.
It wasn't that there were UFOs present. We all knew that. It's that the intensity of the cover-up and the U.S. imperialism in making sure no other countries would come forward. That, you know, if there was a crashed craft in Brazil, the U.S. would go in there and take a craft from another country.
This is how the U.S. has been able to do it, because the U.S. has by far the greatest military and intelligence system in the world.
But that was more shocking than the fact that there were UFOs.
Well, and when you get right down to it, the fact that this topic has undermined what is supposed to be a democratic and Republican system of government, that's very important. And these members of Congress, I think rightly, were probably more concerned about that than anything else. Why isn't our system working? They wanted to know.
Exactly. So what else? So you do the government, and then what else?
Well, there's you can't understand UFOs in a contemporary way without understanding the contemporary science that really informs a lot of the UFO phenomenon. I have a chapter called UFOs and Weird Science. And there's a lot of weird science when you think about it. How can a craft seemingly go from indefinite loitering to instant acceleration? That alone is an amazing thing.
We don't have the physics for that right now.
Well, there are people who have been trying to figure it out, and there's actually some very interesting physics and a lot of interesting studies that deal with it, and I try to just explain that. There's a whole
Wait, before you get there, let me ask you one question, because I think some studies have been done why the craft is shaped the way it is. That must have. Do you have an explanation about that? Kind of
well, there's I'm no scientist, but I've tried to understand what these people say. When you get into something known as electrogravitics, for example, this is a science that does seem to be completely legitimate, and more it's getting mainstream acceptance. That is, electrogravitics, think anti-gravity, think generate a type of a force field where you have a charge at one end of a craft, you have a charge at the other end, and disk shape seems to work best for that. There were experiments back in the 1950s by a fellow named Thomas Townsend Brown, who did electrogravitic experiments with disc-shaped craft, and they seem to have done very, very well with it.
So that's a clue into understanding their technology, in the sense, if we back engineer.
That's one aspect of the weird science, but there's much, much more when you're dealing with UFOs. It's not just propulsion, it's energy. Where does this sources of energy come from that allow them to do the things that they do? And so you're getting into studies of dealing with what we call free energy.
So how far in the future, if these things, I mean, we know they exist, how many centuries or millenniums would you estimate, based on our rate of technology, this kind of technology is from where we are?
Hard question to answer, a very hard question to answer. I think that we're on an exponential path right now, our society. So I think 150 years ago, we were a world of horses pulling wooden carts.
Less than 100 years ago, pretty much.
Oh, about that, right.
Yeah.
So we go from that to the light bulb, to automobiles, to aircraft, to rockets, to computers, to integrated circuits, to iPods and iPhones, and now advanced nanotech, advanced artificial intelligence coming up, the ability to map and replicate the human genome. And now the newest revolution that is exciting is 3D printing, which will just be able to think Replicator on Star Trek, but not just of inorganic material, but probably 3D printing organic material. This is incredible.
Yeah.
All right. So we're on this exponential path. So when you're asking how much more advanced they are, It could be, all right, that even within 50 years, we really might have the ability to, as I like to say, leap into their world. And it's possible that they're aware of this.
And
now,
possibly even they're planting some technology, seeds within.
I've wondered, there's a long history of what appear to be legitimate cases of retrievals of UFOs. I mean, we know about Rodwell, and there's a number of other cases where we seem to have gotten very exotic material to study.
But go back to them being aware of it, because I think you were going to make a point about the ETs.
Well, there's just to finish up this whole idea on weird science, you've got propulsion, you've got energy, you've got space-time itself. People would like to know, how do they get from some other star, if that's where they're from, here? That's a long way off. But in fact, there's interesting science that shows how that might be possible. And then the other thing relating to weird science, and this is really a key part of UFOs for the 21st century mind. The key part is, I guess we would call consciousness. 20, 30 years ago, I would say that consciousness was a much smaller part of what we would call UFO studies, and it's a very big part now.
In what way? Give me an example of. I mean, I think it is, because I think it's all consciousness. But how do you see it in ufology?
Well, one thing right off the bat is that it's very clear when you look at reports of what appear to be contact between us and them, that there's a mind-to-mind connection going on at various points. From something as simple as a person saying, I woke up at 2:30 in the morning and I had this urge to look out my bedroom window and I saw this orange orb floating in my yard. I've heard this a number of times. Now, what causes that person to have this idea in their mind,
Right.
And then you go even further to cases of apparent, let us say, apparent or alleged abduction, where there's a claim by the person, and this happens many times, that they had a mind-to-mind connection with this being. So consciousness in that sense is very important.
And also, just contact itself can sort of distort our field. Jenny Randall's called it the Oz effect, where
Exactly.
you're in the presence of these beings, and reality is not what it is just sitting here like this. That's another effect on consciousness.
Right. In another conversation that you and I had, we talked about this, and I think you made this point, that they somehow seem to disrupt our field, and I think that's a good way to put it.
So that's a very key point for the 21st century mind, because as we understand consciousness, we might be coming a little closer to understanding who these beings are.
Right, and then the other, exactly. The other thing about consciousness that I find intriguing, and I don't really know if we have a true handle on this, but the idea of consciousness as, there's a little bug that just
It's a drone. I'll edit that
wants
out.
to be my friend.
No, but
And there we go.
okay, go ahead. What were you saying?
The other aspect of consciousness that I think is important in this context is that, increasingly we have claims of people who will say that they had a telepathic download of an extraterrestrial message, or that they had a kind of communication with other extraterrestrial beings, whether even channeled or not necessarily channeled. And I have a hard time knowing how to take some of these claims, because many of them inherently are difficult to verify or prove. On the other hand, I don't dismiss the fact that there is this ability for us to have a kind of non-traditional way of communicating. So I think this is actually something that does happen. After all, I don't have a problem believing in the reality of something like remote viewing, which is, I think, shows that the human mind has this ability to kind of go outside what we are and have another type of experience. So when you have individuals claiming that they're having exo-consciousness or telepathic connections with these other beings that are not physically present, I think it's something that's worth exploring in a scientific, responsible way.
So this book is then geared in a way towards that understanding about the nature of the mind, in a sense.
Right. I think that's part of it.
What else is in there?
Well, another thing about understanding UFOs in a contemporary setting is simply recognizing the social context of where we're at. I mean, think of it this way. 50 years ago, if you were a UFO researcher, one of your biggest problems would be simply getting access to reports. That was a hard thing. That's not the hard thing anymore. All right? In North America alone, the two major websites that collect reports collect over 10,000 UFO reports every year. It's an unbelievable amount.
What's the hard part?
The hard part is filtering. All right.
The out there, the crazies from the...
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And then we have YouTube, we have Facebook. In other words, we have copy and paste journalism, as I like to call it. If you're active on Facebook, it seems like every week there's another incredible rumor that's portrayed as fact. And so what we need is to have a good kind of filter. What I'm saying is that everyone involved in this field needs to step up their own game personally in terms of being able to investigate, have critical thinking skills. And this is an important thing. I talk about this in this book.
So that's really key for the 21st century mind is critical thinking.
Absolutely.
Because anyone could claim they had an abduction.
Talk is cheap, man. Talk is the easiest thing in the world, but you've got to be able to back it up with evidence, with scientific rigor, with the ability critically to look at this.
So this book is a sort of primer
that's right.
for a culture that needs to be prepared for what is coming.
We haven't had a good UFO introductory book, I think, for generations. I've looked back over the literature, and there are very good UFO books, but there hasn't been a UFO book that covers the whole field in a concise way, in a fresh way, I think in a very, very, very long time. And that's one thing that I've tried to do here.
So in a way, maybe this is what perhaps the ETs are waiting for. This kind of, I mean, I don't know, but...
Well, it's something that I think will I'm hoping to hit a broad enough audience where it'll trip a few types of thinking in their mind, thinking, oh, that's interesting.
No, it is what we need. Going back to AD, after disclosure, some of the effects of that, as you say in the book, will be psychological, social. Can you go into a little specifics of exactly, okay, Obama or whoever says we're here, how does then suddenly the whole culture change?
Well, my God, writing AD, trying to think this whole thing through was one of the greatest adventures of my life. Because what really I found was, first of all, there's two aspects of disclosure. One is that people say, well, it's impossible, it'll never happen, the secret's been here for years and years, what makes you think it's going to change? Which is a fair question.
Yeah.
But to that, my answer is simply, well, today is not yesterday, and tomorrow is not going to be today. We are, as I said, we're on a fast track. So it's going to happen, it'll be forced. So then the question is, what then? And what then is that it's going to rock our world in ways that are not always going to be very fun. I think it's going to be a very rough ride in a lot of ways. For example, the president he's pushed into a corner and he has to admit that this is a real thing. So he'll say, it's come to my attention that yes, the UFO reality does seem to be something that's genuine and not from our civilization. So he says that. Well, what he would like to say after that is, good night, everyone, I'm going on vacation for 6 months and I'm not going to... But unfortunately, the president won't have that luxury. There'll be a lot of follow-up questions, difficult follow-up questions. First of all, people will want to know, is there a threat? And what if the president doesn't have a good answer to that?
What if he doesn't?
What if he doesn't know?
So what does that create in your thinking with our culture?
What's going to happen, I think disclosure will very likely happen without the benefit of seeing these alien beings right there on the podium.
Right.
We'll get to a point where we've proved that they're here, but we may not be able to grab one for study openly.
Unless, of course, we go to Roswell or Area 51 and dig up these...
Well, you never know, but the thing is, in the meantime, there's going to be tremendous cultural wars. We have cultural wars going on now, but that's going to be nothing compared with after this disclosure, where you'll have Christians on one hand having a particular interpretation, you'll have New Agers on the other having a different, you'll have scientists looking at it. It'll be very difficult to get an agreement on what we're dealing with.
Well, it goes back to the Copernicus revolution. That's what the church felt when Copernicus said, guess what, the earth isn't the center of the universe. We're saying the same thing and going through a similar...
Yes, absolutely. And it's going to take generations, I think, to work out. But that's just one thing, is culture. Another question that will be a very difficult question, and it'll be necessary to deal with, is simply, people are going to want to know, how have you been able to keep this secret so effectively for years? And they're going to want to ask, as I have been asking for years, how does this make us reinterpret the structure of power? Who is the president in charge? If the president's not in charge, who is? How does
I don't think they're going to go there. I don't think...
There will be people who I think will.
I know, but look, everyone knows that the Kennedy assassination was some kind of conspiracy. No one's being held accountable for that.
No, that's true, but think of it this way. Think of it this way, 80–90% of Americans know that the Kennedy assassination was a conspiracy. 100% of the rest of the world knows this, and yet the official truth is that it was a lone gunman.
Right, I know.
And so that has allowed for no true political ramifications and investigation of what's actually happening. With the UFO disclosure, there won't be that luxury. So it'll be openly admitted that this is real. People will want to know how the secret's been kept, and that'll get us into a very significant study of what I would call black budget culture, black budget reality.
And of course,
that's going to be messy.
And of course, your breakaway civilization. We'll get into that in another. We're running out of time. I just want to ask you.
We've covered a lot of ground in a short period of time.
It was great. I really enjoyed it. What is the most convincing evidence of a UFO presence? Is my final question here for you.
That's a good question. Well, I would say I would answer it in two ways. One is simply an overwhelming number of reports coming in from thousands of people every single year. There's obviously something happening. All you have to do is have eyes to look and a mind to read them.
But the one piece of evidence you've seen?
What I would say is it's the collection of declassified military documents that we were lucky enough to get, especially during the 1970s through Freedom of Information, that prove, not suggest, not hint, they prove that the United States military has been actively engaged and concerned about UFOs flying over sensitive bases, objects that did not look normal, did not behave normally, were not supposed to be there, were not supposed to exist, but yet there they were, all at the same time that they're telling the public, nothing to see here.
This is the most exciting news we can be aware of, the fact that we are not alone. I know it sounds a little cliche, but it's truth. Richard,
We're not alone, no.
Thank you.
Pleasure, Alan.
I do want to follow up. Richard Dolan's UFOs for the 21st Century Mind, his new book, a real overview. If you want to start somewhere, if you want to give it to relatives, this is the place to start. Richard Dolan Press, that's coming out with...
My new publishing company's name is Richard Dolan Press.
Okay. I'm Alan Steinfeld for New Realities. Check my website, newrealities.com. Thanks for watching.